Thank you again for being here. Welcome to this year's summer lecture series. If we do not yet know each other, my name is Jordan Grassi. I work with The Gathering and young adults at Glen. Usually Reverend Brent will be leading the summer lecture series, but he's not in today. He will be back next week. But excited to be with y'all and to kick off the series again. With that being said, we are kicking it off with Reverend Dr. Quincy Brown, talking about Wesleyan Spiritual Formation, a little bit about Dr. Brown. He is the District Superintendent and Missional Strategist for the Central South District of the North Georgia Conference of the UMC. As a certified transitional guide and church transformation coach with over 25 years of ministry, Quincy is passionate about equipping churches to imagine new ways to connect people with Jesus. Quincy has served as a youth minister, as an associate pastor, chaplain and vice president of LaGrange College, an assistant pastor at LaGrange First, church planter and residence at Impact Church, church planter at Threshold Church, and executive pastor of Peachtree City UMC. He's a native of Gainesville, Georgia, a graduate of DeVry Institute of Technology. He's a Candler grad and a Gammon Theological Seminary at the ITC graduate. Quincy is married to Dion Moore Brown, the income tax manager for Oxford Industries in Atlanta, and he is the author of Discipleship Path, Guiding Congregations to Connect with Jesus. Please join me in welcoming in our, Zoom way of snapping or clapping or waving, Dr. Quincy Brown. Thanks for being here, Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Jordan, and good morning, friends. It's good to see all of you. When Brent asked me to do this, I've got a confession to make. I am ending my tenure as your superintendent. And July 1st, I start a new adventure as an appointment as the pastor, senior pastor at Snellville United Methodist Church. And so my intent was to take the entire month of June off for vacation. And so that was all set and planned until Brent called me. And I said, okay, for Glenn, I'll do this. So this is my last official act as a superintendent. So you guys get the prize for that. He asked me to talk about Wesleyan Spiritual Formation. Another just point of confession, I am no scholar in Wesleyan Spiritual Formation. In fact, I doubt very really if Wesley even knew what spiritual formation was, because I don't think that was a term back in the 18th century. So what I like to do today is I'll have some comments and I'll open it up for you to have back and forth comments. I know this is supposed to be a lecture, but my style of lecturing is actually conversation and fielding questions as we go and having comments. And so if there is a chance that you have a question, don't feel like you're interrupting me. Unmute yourself and ask the question. But I thought that the easiest way to talk about this is to kind of give a framework to get to Wesleyan spiritual formation. Is to look at John and Charles Wesley's life. I'm of the mindset that when you study any type of movement, in order to fully understand the results of any type of movement, you have to understand the experiences that led to the movement. These things don't happen in a vacuum. And so John and Charles Wesley, the brothers were influenced by a spiritual heritage that came before them. Two distinct tracks. One was Puritanism. This is where the Wesleyans got the emphasis on discipline and personal religious piety, and Anglicanism. They were members of the Anglican Church, Church of England, and they had an emphasis on sacraments. And so you're going to see this kind of dual tension with John Wesley as he begins this lifelong quest of, in his terms, assurance. You all know that term from a favorite hymn of mine and perhaps yours, Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine. And so John Wesley spent his entire life looking on a quest for looking for assurance, that he felt assured that Jesus had saved him from his sin. And so there's this intellectual life, and there will be this heart journey of him searching for God and how he put this together, which leads to today the United Methodist Church and the doctrines that we have. Originally, they never set out to start a church. Their whole purpose was to renew the Church of England. And they sought to have people to take seriously the call to live a holy life. Now, their term is holy life. Translating it today, it would sound something like this. They were trying to have a transforming effect on the world through God's grace, a disciplined life, and the integration of personal piety and social holiness. And so they wanted to transform the world through God's grace and a disciplined life that had personal piety and social holiness. And so that was their aim of renewing the Church of England. So they used a term called sanctification. Now today that term is used in different ways. John Wesley and his brother Charles used it as the working of the Holy Spirit to free our lives from sin. In other words, they were trying to draw as close to God as they could, because the closer you got to God, they felt like the holier they would be. Now, it doesn't mean that they live a life that's otherworldly. That's not what they were trying to do. That's not the intent. Today, many of you may have think of terms of holiness as a purity code. That's not what the Wesleys were intending. Rather, they were trying to live for God 24 hours a day so that their inner lives will be changed so that they would have no outward sin. And the way that they saw that was through love of God and neighbor. So that's where they were. And so John Wesley started his education in London, Charterhouse, and he struggled to understand Christian faith. Now, just a little background into John Wesley. I never knew the man. I'm not that old. But my reading of John Wesley over the years leads me to believe that he was kind of an anal retentive kind of guy. He was detail oriented, may even been obsessive compulsive, but that's just my opinion of him. I wasn't there. And so he struggled to understand Christian faith. So he was trying to get a grasp of it. And so after he graduates from the Charterhouse School, he attends Oxford University. And when he graduates from there, he's a very well-educated man. He's an Oxford Don. He remains at Oxford as a fellow at Lincoln College. And this is where some interesting things begin to happen. And for me, spending 17 years of my life on a college campus, this is where Wesley comes alive to me. He was appointed to supervise and tutor a group of undergraduates and academic and spiritual processes. And so those of us that are familiar with Emory University, this would be kind of a co-curricular activity that goes along with the outside class. And so think of it as a laboratory or a co-curricular activity that went along with their studies. Now, this group, because they were trying to get close to God and they were doing it 24 hours a day, they were called the Holy Club. They met 4 nights a week. They studied the classics. They read the Greek New Testament. They practiced prayer, fasting, confession, and taking of the sacrament, Holy Communion. This would later, as we'll talk about in a minute, will become the formula or the method for Wesleyan spiritual formation. This is the background for it. Their methodical approach to trying to serve God every hour of the day led to the fellow students mocking them and calling them Methodist. That's where the term comes from. It is not a term of endearment. Originally, at least, it was not. It was a term of mocking and shame. So the Holy Club was growing. They were getting successful in terms of producing students that were trying to do this. And yet Wesley was still feeling empty. Remember, his quest is to have assurance that God has forgiven him of his sins. Perhaps you know people like that. Maybe you've been that way where you kind of doubt, you wish you had some assurance. And this is where Wesley was. And so outwardly, he did everything he was supposed to do, but inwardly, he was still searching for God. And he was secretly asking questions about faith. Outwardly, he shouldn't do that, but inwardly, he was empty. Enter the Moravians. John Wesley was sent as a chaplain to the American colonies, to the Native Americans. And aboard the ship that was crossing the Atlantic, he had an encounter with a group of German religious folks called the Moravians. And on the way there came this great storm. So much so that it scared Wesley and his friends to death. They thought they were going to die. Well, during the worship service, the Moravians kept singing and praying as if nothing was happening. And so Wesley watched their behavior. Now, he thought he was going to die, and he was feared for his life. Moravians experienced the same thing, but yet they were calm. And so he asked, hey, aren't you scared? And they said, heavens no, we're not scared. We're assured. And all of a sudden, Wesley said, that's what I'm looking for. And so he later, once the issue with the on the American colonies failed, we're not going to talk about that. I imagine some of you know that story of how he came to Georgia and how he had to basically was run out of Georgia, out of America at night because of issues that he had with a certain woman. We won't talk about that one today. You can look that up on your free time. Just Google Sophie Hockey and you'll find all the juicy details there. Later, Wesley is introduced to a Moravian by the name of Peter Bowler. And he talks about grace and the heart, a heart religion. And so Bowler becomes Wesley's mentor. And this is one thing that he said that I thought was very interesting. Bowler tells Wesley and his brother, focus less on what you want to achieve for God and more on what God could do for you. And so there was a shift there. And so Wesley's still struggling. This storm happens in 1736. It wasn't until 2 years later, in May of 1738, that Wesley attended a Moravian gathering on Aldersgate Street. And that's where he had the experience. And many of you who are diehard United Methodists know that last Monday or Tuesday was Aldersgate Day, the day where Wesley had his conversion 2 weeks ago. It was after. And so this is what he said. I felt my heart strangely warm. Perhaps you've heard that. I felt that I did trust in Christ, Christ alone for salvation, and an assurance, that's what he's been looking for, was given me that God had taken away my sins, even mine, and saved me from the law of sin and death. Okay. This experience, all of these experiences, is what led Wesley to develop the method of how to grow his own spiritual life and other people's spiritual life by spending time with God through spiritual disciplines. Let me stop there. There's a lot of information there. Let me stop there and see if there are any comments or questions. Am I frozen? All right.
I have a question.
Sure.
How do you relate that to, I would say mostly the younger people today who are searching for assurance, and they go every which way,
Sure.
Looking for that. There seems to be this deep desire that is a little similar to what you're describing in the time of Wesley.
Yeah, and so thanks for that question, Lynn. I think there's several ways to talk about it, and I'll just talk about my experience because of what I saw in 17 years, and particularly with students who were studying religion. What happened with me, with students, is they had studied so much academic things about knowing that they couldn't worship anymore. And so they had to have some type of experience. They had to have some type of connection. And so for me, if I were to just kind of categorize it, today, people that are 18 to 35 or even 18 to 40, and that's actually 3 generations, or at least 2. What you're seeing is all kind of information out there, but there's a lack of meaning and purpose. And so if the church is going to help the next generation, it's got to structure things that allows people to bring their doubts, just like Wesley was struggling with his assurance, and not be afraid to listen to that. Because here's the reality: we're all being shaped and formed by something. The question is, are we being shaped and formed by Jesus? Okay. And so in our own lives, we have to ask that question. And so how do we create spaces, intentional spaces, for people to ask their questions so that they're not judged, and it becomes messy? It took Wesley 2 years of doing this, right? I skipped a lot of stuff, right? I skipped the marriage stuff that he failed miserably at it. I mean, it was, if the 6 o'clock news was in Great Britain, somebody would have been called up on domestic abuse. Okay, it got really messy, and so I don't know if that answers your question, but part of it is looking for meaning, and for one generation, it's the question is this worth my time? The millennial generation, my experience is, this is not to be meant to paint with a broad brush, but the millennial generation, oldest person is about 40, 41. They're going to ask the question, is it worth my time? My generation, Generation X, the oldest of us is 56. They're going to ask, what's in it for me? The generation that has just graduated from high school, that would be Generation Z. They're going to ask, what is the impact? And so if you begin to look at those things, this is how, for me at least, it applies to Wesley, because Wesley was trying to renew the church, and he was trying to give these practices to help people to renew. Other questions?
Mm.
So what are the disciplines? What are the practices? I use the word discipline and practice interchangeably because to me they mean the same thing. For Wesley, he started with 5. You can add more, but these are the 5 that he started with the Holy Club. And I think if we use these 5, we might see some changes in our own life and the lives of others. First was prayer. Wesley spent time at the beginning of every day in prayer. He also liked to say a short prayer every hour. I told you he was anal retentive, okay? Every hour he said a short prayer on the hour and began every important action with prayer, okay? This is who Wesley was. Everything was orderly and structured. And if you open your, I know we're coming out of the pandemic and we're coming back to worship in person slowly. But if you think about pre-pandemic, and if you have a hymn book, and if you open up the United Methodist hymnal, in the beginning, there are Wesley's notes, and he even tells you how to sing. Okay, this is who Wesley was. Okay, he also, so it was prayer, and then it was Bible study. He used his travel time on horseback. I don't know how he did this. Obviously, he was more athletic than I was. To readily read through the Bible. His love for scripture was so great that he said, let me be a man of one book. And so he was a man of one book. And later on, his followers, the Methodists, were to become a man of people of 2 books, men and women of 2 books, the Bible and the discipline, okay? Journaling. He used a daily journal to record his experiences and conversations. It was a separate diary to list how he spent every hour of his time and the temptations that he faced, okay? Regularly reviewed them to see where he still needed to grow. So this whole thing about this Puritan discipline, you see it showing up over and over and over again. He fasted. He would fast for breakfast. Now, I'm not suggesting that you do this way, but this is what Wesley did. Every Wednesday and Friday, or at least most of them, he fasted for breakfast and lunch. Every Wednesday and Friday, okay? I don't do that. And you can tell if you saw me, because I've got these pandemic pounds that I got to get rid of. He would also do longer fasts when praying for something specific. And he took communion as much as he could. He believed that communion drew him closer to God, could draw people closer to God, just as other spiritual disciplines could. And so he took communion weekly at Anglican services and encouraged all Wesley's Methodists to do the same. So, a lot of times in churches, you'll do communion every first Sunday or once a quarter. For Wesley, he wanted you to do it every week. These are the practices. This is what he did. Right? And so by doing this, he was trying to help people to get closer to God. So in their activities, later on, some of the things were acts of service, where he would do things for the poor and the orphans, and so he called it works of piety, the things inside, and works of mercy, the things outside. Assurance inside, so that your life is holy, so that you're closer to God, and being closer to God, loving God, helps you to love neighbor. And that means doing good works, visiting the sick, those in prison, feeding the hungry, giving generous to the needs of others. That was his method. And, that's a quick and dirty overview of Wesleyan spiritual formation from Wesley himself. Now, if we were to take that, I would suggest that we begin to ask ourselves basic questions like, how much time do we spend in worship and how do we worship? How much time do we spend in service? How much time do we spend in giving? How much time do we spend in witness? These might sound vaguely familiar to you. And the reason that they're vaguely familiar is these are the vows that we promised when we joined the church. These are our membership vows. You all remember them, right? We honor to, we promise to uphold this church by our prayers, our presence, our gifts, our witness, and our service. That's one way that we could talk about spiritual formation today. And how are our churches helping peoples in the pew do those 5 things? So my question to you is, after you've heard all of this, what are you to do? What does this spur you to do? What questions, what thoughts does this stir in you? This is when you unmute yourself and you can ask a question or say something.
Say again the 5 disciplines. Can you just list them for us?
The disciplines of Wesley are what I mentioned for the church membership. Which ones?
Well, you started off with saying Wesleyan, basically.
Yeah. Okay. The Wesley's 5. Yeah. So they're prayer, Bible study, journaling, fasting, taking communion. Those were Wesley's.
Okay.
I
think you muted it.
Okay. I'm wondering what we're supposed to do now, because the pandemic is kind of letting up. And the story is that a lot of people that have not come to church won't come anymore. And some people will like doing this better than coming to church. And what are we going to do with all our buildings and spaces? And how will we connect with the generations you mentioned?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carolyn, and it's probably beyond the scope of this class. Here, however, I would suggest this because I'm seeing this in my position as superintendent. What I'm seeing across the board in our district includes DeKalb, Rockdale, Newton, and Henry counties. Our churches are seeing anywhere from 30 to 40% of the attendance pre-pandemic now. That's since Easter. Summer months it's hard to gauge because even before the pandemic, summer months, people didn't come to church as much, okay, because of other activities. So it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen in the fall. One of the things that I see as hopeful in terms of gathering and buildings is we have an opportunity, particularly churches like Glenn, who have a wonderful traditional sanctuary, to capitalize on a younger generation who looks for meaning and the rituals and something to connect them to God. So there might be opportunities, natural opportunities to do that. So I'm not suggesting that other churches don't have that. You've got churches that are built quite differently than the traditional sanctuary with the pews and the stained glass windows and the organ. But my experience and what I'm hearing is people 25 and younger are actually more gravitating toward the traditional experience. So there are opportunities. That's what I'm hearing right now. So for whatever it's worth.
I'd like to be with the people that you're hearing this from. I like that.
Well, you know, is that us? Hang on for a second. Sorry about that. I just had a glitch. Didn't mean to scare anybody. I don't know what that was. So I think, you know, one of the things that we might want to do is just kind of listen, keep our ears out. I used to be around the Emory campus a lot, and I hung out at the bookstore, at the Barnes and Noble, at the Starbucks, and that's why I would do a lot of my listening sessions. And so a lot of times you would hear things like that there. So it's closer than you might think.
It's very cool. Thank you.
Sure. Other thoughts or comments?
Wouldn't you say that Wesley was a proponent of corporate worship?
Absolutely.
And communion, the Eucharist, is not an individual isolated thing. It's done in community.
That's right.
So I'm not sure why you wouldn't list public worship, corporate worship, as one of the disciplines along with the other five.
Well, these are the core that he started with the Holy Club. Corporate worship is part of what he would do with his band and societies. Okay, so there are two swings of Wesley. I gave you what led up to his conversion. When he put his bands and classes and societies together, corporate worship was the first place that that happened. So thank you for that, Gerald. That is actually true. There are like 4 or 5 others that have been added on, but this is the disciplines that he did in the Holy Club.
Well, that begins to get at how we can rejuvenate Wesleyan thought now.
Yes.
As we rejuvenate public worship, corporate worship.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is gathering around the common table.
That's right. That's right. That's an excellent point. You know, when he also, I didn't mention this either, but one of the things, leading questions that he would have in these bands and society was, how is it with your soul? He would often start the question that way, and that's where the conversations and what he called the holy conferencing would start. So communion and connection and worship was vital for Wesley. So much so that he got into trouble in the Anglican Church, and you know, they kind of kicked him out of the church for preaching. And so George Whitefield was a contemporary of Wesley, and he was doing this field preaching. And Wesley, because he was, you know, he was cut from a different cloth, he says, I don't really like that. But that was actually where things were happening. And so we've done a little field preaching during the pandemic, right? If you had worship outside, that's kind of field preaching, okay? So in some ways we're being forced to go back to some of the core roots of John Wesley.
Well, the other part of that is we as Methodists have learned the value of work in small groups.
Yes.
And holding each other accountable. And you
yes.
see the largest congregations being divided up into smaller groups.
Yep.
So they really have relational experiences, right?
Yep. Yeah. Now the argument, Gerald, that I make is we started that. The Baptists just coined it as Sunday school. Okay. But we actually started that, but the Baptists coined it as Sunday school because this whole small group mentality of accountability was huge for Wesley.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, churches like Glenn have lasted throughout the ages because of the small groups, whether it be Sunday school, whether it be choir, whether it be UMW, UMM. These are those classes and societies today. It's our terminology, okay? But that's the core of who we are as Methodists.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Other thoughts or questions? Anything you want to ask me?
I have a question
Sure.
that troubles me when we talk about young people and the younger
Sure.
generation. Hearing from my own grandchildren, and they are pretty impatient
Yeah.
with the Methodist Church right now
Sure.
because of our constipated approach to getting anything done about this LGBT issue. And
Sure.
they are skeptical. They're not joining. I
Yeah.
mean, I think the future of the church, for me, we've lost so much talent and so many people over this issue, and we still can't seem to resolve it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just very frustrating to me. And I was encouraged when Brooks Holyfield talked to us about how many splits we've had in Methodism throughout our history.
Yep.
So it made you hopeful that we will survive this.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to, for me, really determine the future of how we appeal to a younger generation.
Yeah. I think you're right. Just piggybacking off of that, even without our Methodist constipation, I actually like that. I hadn't thought about that. I don't know if I can use that in public, but I do like that. Even without that, what we're finding is generations past baby boomers will not join anything. So it's not that this has become the issue. It's generations seeing things differently. When I was growing up, and I'm not that old, I'll be 52 in December, but grew up in the Methodist Church, and all I know is Methodism, United Methodism. Church I grew up in, and I was born in it. You had to believe first before you belong. Now, we probably need to talk about belonging before believing.
Sure.
Here's where the rub happens. Today, we have split the believe and belong. We've made it either or. We've got some groups in churches that say, well, all you got to do is belong and never believe. On the other hand, we've got groups that say, all you got to do is believe and never belong. I think both are misguided. I think you have to believe and belong. But I think with younger generations, it is service and those type of activities to get them to connect. And so one of the things that I'm working on is a formula or a method that talks about connecting with people who are following Jesus in the church, following Jesus and people in the church, becoming like Jesus and people in the church, and doing what Jesus did in the world. That's a different way of talking about church. I believe that, and we do that now, we don't stress it, but I believe that that is the hope. And Dr. Holifield's right. We've had splits, and we're going to continue to split. That's just, my daddy told me, he said, son, don't get too close to people who like division more than multiplication. He says, because people who divide will always seek to divide. And I found him to be true about that, regardless of what stripe or and so he always talked about multiplication. And my daddy was the person to teach me my multiplication tables. And my daddy was a Korean War veteran, and I was named after him. And You know, it was like boot camp for me. And so I'm still in therapy of recovering from that. But I love them to death.
Yeah.
Great thoughts.
Thank
Other
you.
questions or comments?
I would just like to say that we started the pandemic with a small group study on The Walk by Adam Hamilton.
Yeah.
And he actually has a different 5, but the same 5 methods for essential practices of Christian life. And I'll just mention them: worship with prayer. He had prayer 5 times a day, study the scripture, service, giving to support the church, and witness. So it's 5 to, it's almost 6, but it's very similar. And the interesting thing from what you just said is he ends up talking about multiplication. He said, if everybody in your church did 5 of those things and invited somebody to come once a week, 50 people could really multiply the stuff that's going on. And I think we didn't really finish the study. I read the book more than once because I really go back and gravitate to different parts of it. But I feel like it's really worth doing again because we didn't finish it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Jane, for that reminder. I'm familiar with that. And here's a shameless plug for my own book.
Oh, good.
And the second half of my book, Discipleship Path, Guiding Congregations to Connect with Jesus, I use the outcome of discipleship as the 5 vows of membership. So I talk about worship, service, witness, prayer. I talk about that and how you move people through a 3-step process of discerning, dreaming, and developing. And so I commend that to you as well, because it could be used as a small group study. But that is
we've already done Adam Hamilton. It'd be great to do yours.
Yeah, but that is the exact attempt. And so, again, I am not a scholar on Wesleyan Spiritual Formation, but discipleship, I know more about. And so at the end of the day, we're to be making disciples who make disciples. And we can't make disciples if we don't have any clue about what a disciple looks like. And so part of what I have worked for 4 years in this position as superintendent is helping churches with the question, okay, so when a person shows up, and this is pre-pandemic, okay? So when a person shows up at your church for the first time, what's their next step? I'm not talking about program. What's their next step? And if it's not clear to them, then there's some work to be done. Because at the end of the day, somebody's going to say, now what do we do? I think, Carolyn, you asked that question. That's what most people who come to church, that's what they're going to ask. Okay, I like it. So what do I do next? And so there has to be clear steps, clear paths to help people on their spiritual journey. It might be join a group. That's fine. But you got to be clear about it. Other thoughts or questions? Great stuff.
Quincy?
Yes, sir.
It strikes me that one way in which we both manifest love and engage in a spiritual discipline is to undertake the discipline of listening to each other. And that is spiritually a very difficult thing to do because our own demands and aims always flow to the front. And to learn to listen to people and ask them questions and take them seriously by hearing what they have to say without trying to convince them of something,
Mm-hmm.
seems to be both an expression of, if you will, piety,
Mm-hmm.
and in the long run, a way to build community.
Yes.
And I think that the Wesleyan emphasis on love leads us to the path of listening.
Mm-hmm. That's well said, Dr. Holyfield. I appreciate that. And to add, there is a resource that I would commend that's from a different discipline, but gets at the same thing. It's a book by Edgar Schein called Humble Inquiry, the gentle art of listening instead of telling. It gets at that Edgar Schein, Humble Inquiry. It gets at that. He looks at it from a leadership managerial standpoint, but in my work, I use it and translate it to the church. It's very, very accessible about how to ask questions of curiosity instead of telling. So thank you, Dr. Holyfield. That is a spiritual discipline.
Yes, thank you. You know, there are lots of people who have been told all their lives and never been listened to. Mm-hmm. So if you think about real gifts you can offer to people, it seems to me that listening is a way to in-gift another person.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Other thoughts? We've got a little bit more time. I want to be mindful of your time. Other thoughts or questions? This has been wonderful.
I just wanted to add to what Brooks said. Brooks, you may remember one of Bill's sermons and lectures was on the gifts of Pentecost as being the gift of hearing, not in speaking in tongues, but the gift of hearing. And he went through that scripture of how many times the word hearing was used. And I thought about that when you were speaking, Brooks.
That's great insight. Yeah.
Thanks, Gator. That's a good point.
Yeah. Other thoughts, questions, comments?
Hi, Quincy.
Yes.
So I'm thinking about the story information that you were sharing about Wesley, and I'm thinking that the tension between what we ought to do and what we do goes way back in our faith to the scripture, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Yes.
I'm just curious, did Wesley ever come to terms with or even recognize the dichotomy between his role as a spiritual leader and the failures that he had in his personal life? And if he did he ever offer any insight into how those
you're gonna have to talk to somebody that's a little bit more my pay grade. So I don't know that. I taught Old Testament at LaGrange College, and one of the classes that I taught in the religion department was Methodist Studies. We never covered that, so others might know that. I have no earthly idea. It'd be interesting to know that. I just frankly don't know. Dr. Holyfield or some other scholars that know more than I do could answer that question. I'm sorry, I can't provide any insight.
That's okay. Thanks.
Well, let me say just one thing about that. When Quincy talked about an abusive situation in his marriage, it was Wesley who was being abused. His wife was intensely jealous. He made a serious mistake in marrying a woman named Grace Murray, who seemed to him at first the ideal mate. His brother Charles did everything he could to stop the marriage, but he was not successful. He had stopped an earlier marriage that might have been happier. John Wesley engaged one of his practices was letter writing, and he wrote letters to especially women who were interested in the Methodist movement and involved in it. And his wife became intensely jealous of those women, and she would go through Wesley's mail and try to find evidence that he was being unfaithful to her in some way, which he was in fact not. And she would attack him physically. So the abuse came from Grace Murray, and you might say that what Wesley experienced when finally he was able to separate from her permanently. They did not ever divorce, but they did in fact separate. What he experienced was deep and profound relief and gratitude. So he had some hard experiences, and some of them were due to some of his own character flaws, but not all of them were.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for expounding upon that.
I wanted to say, Quincy, thank you for being here. I spent my 40 years in ministry, a huge amount of it working in Christian education. So formation, especially as we see life progressing, has always been a very important thing. And I had a husband who gave a whole lot of attention to that. Just wanted to say that how we are doing outreach, and you were talking about that, is so crucial. And knowing, well, once you do that, then how do you go keep on working and forming and doing outreach? And churches who have such a set situation, sometimes Glenn is seen that way. We need to really be aware of how we can have fresh and renewed ways of doing that kind of outreach in our community and beyond. But thank you. We're proud of what you've done over these years and have followed that, and are pleased you're going to Snellville.
Well, thank you, Laura. Lee. If I can just have just a point of personal privilege, that means the world to me, because your husband Jim was a mentor to me, and the whole notion of development and faith development, and he and I had a lot of conversation. In fact,
Yes.
I did my dissertation with him, and so we go back a long way, and so he is instrumental in my notion of formation, what it means to be informed and shaped. I honestly believe human lives are being shaped by the influences around them, whether they're conscious or unconsciously aware of them. And so our job as Christians and Methodists is to have a intentional way of helping people to form and shape their lives so that it's transformed into the image of Christ.
Well, as I've listened to you, I wanted to just kept thinking he would be so proud.
Well, I'm honored. I'm honored. Thank you for sharing. We've got just a couple of minutes, and so I just want to make sure that giving everybody a chance to ask a question or make a comment. Are there any last thoughts? Well, friends, as you continue your day, know that you will be in my thoughts and prayers. You are being led mightily by a longtime friend and colleague, Mark Westmoreland. Talk with him with the days running the way they are. I can't remember what day it was, but it was within the last 4 or 5 days. And so I'm deeply humbled to be able to lead many folks who were my spiritual giants, Dr. Holyfield, Professor Candler, and others. And so this has been a high and holy moment for me. And so my prayer as you go about your day and begin your week is that God will go in front of you to lead you. May God be behind you to keep you from straying. May God hover above you to protect you and drop underneath you to support you. But most importantly, my prayer for you as you begin this day in worship, that God will walk beside you because of the promise he gave never to leave you. That's my prayer for you. Thank you again for allowing me to share and to be with you today. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Reverend Brown. Thank you for your words and for your service as our DS. And yeah, thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
Thank y'all also for being here. I hope to see y'all next week. We'll have Bishop Sue Hopper Johnson, which will be great. But thank you, Dr. Brown, again. And yeah, y'all take care. Blessed Sunday.
Bye-bye.